Dozens of people have been killed and scores injured in clashes in Bangladesh on Sunday as police fired tear gas and lobbed stun grenades to disperse tens of thousands of protesters calling for Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign. Now the protesters there have announced to organize a March to Dhaka program today. More in this report.
Dozens of people have been killed and scores were injured in clashes in Bangladesh on Sunday. Police fired tear gas and lobbed stun grenades as tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets, calling for Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign.
All the ministers are in hiding. Wait and see how the people will go and surround the Prime Minister's house. If Sheikh Hasina doesn't resign voluntarily, we will take our next step.
The Interior Ministry declared an indefinite nationwide curfew starting at 6 p.m. local time on Sunday. It's the first time it has taken such a step during the current protests, which began last month. The unrest is the government's biggest test since deadly protests erupted after Hasina won a fourth straight term in January elections that were boycotted by the main opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Critics of Hasina, along with human rights groups, have accused her government of using excessive force to stamp out the movement, a charge she and her ministers deny. Demonstrators blocked major highways on Sunday as student protesters launched a non-cooperation program to press for the government's resignation. After a national security panel meeting, Hasina said those protesting were, quote, not students but terrorists who are out to destabilise the nation. For the second time during the recent protests, the government shut down high-speed internet services, mobile operators said. Some social media platforms were also unavailable. Last month, at least 150 people were killed and thousands more were injured and arrested in violence sparked by demonstrations led by student groups protesting against quotas for government jobs. The protests paused after the Supreme Court scrapped most quotas. But students sporadically returned to the streets last week, demanding justice for the families of those killed.
The Indian Embassy, in fact, in Bangladesh issued an advisory urging Indian nationals in the country to remain alert as student protests resumed in Sylhet. The advisory stated, and I quote, all Indian nationals, including students lying in the jurisdiction of Assistant High Commission of India, Sylhet, are requested to be in touch with this office and are advised to remain alert. There, in fact, an advisory issued by the Indian Embassy in Bangladesh, where it has asked students to restrict their movements and remain in contact with the High Commission of India in Dhaka. Protesters are burning down offices of the ruling Awami League across districts, and security forces are not taking measures against the violent agitators. Now, reports suggest that Sheikh Hasina's government is teetering on the brink. India is very concerned about what comes after Hasina and may seek to be involved in the transition process. Now, this moment, in fact, should prompt international pressure on Sheikh Hasina to resign and allow a peaceful transition, likely with army's assistance. Transitioning from an Awami League government to an interim one is complex, especially without giving the impression of an army coup. In 2007, the army set up an interim government when there was no political government in place, only a caretaker one. Experts believe that now with the Prime Minister, Cabinet and Parliament in place, none of whom want to leave power, Sheikh Hasina must agree to resign and allow an interim government to take over. Fears that the protests will reach a level where Prime Minister Hasina has no option but to resign or realize it is in her best interest looms over Dhaka. The big question now is, will Prime Minister Hasina survive the protests?